We're going to talk just about, and there's many of these slides could go into their own separate thing, but this is just an overview of when we have breaking news and how we get the story. So we'll start with what is breaking news. We have a couple categories, the impact right now, and which is things that are short, usually road closures, something the road opens in a couple of hours, power outages, those kinds of things. Weather can become big, but often it's short. So kind of think about the impact is right now, that means we need to get stuff out right away on social media and online. It's unlikely to need extensive resources. Sometimes it's going to need somebody to close out. So if we have a power outage and you're writing that and then you're off, you need to hand off. Because one of the things that often happens on those smaller things is that we forget to close them out. Say the road reopened, the power's back on, the fire's out, whatever small thing it was. And then there's the big stories, which generally includes things like homicides, fatal wrecks, wildfires, floods, that require a little bit more ongoing coverage, anywhere from all day, 2 days, 2 weeks, and sometimes much, much longer with, although the coverage stretches out with gaps in between, and all or most resources are needed. And of course, whenever something happens, there's the unknown. How big will the story get, which is something to always be thinking about and preparing for. Are you ready? This is geared primarily towards reporters, but copy editors and other folks should have numbers as well. Stock your vehicle. Everybody that's a reporter that could be sent on breaking news should have a phone, computer charger, whatever they need to keep themselves going out there. There are little battery-operated phone chargers which will go for 6 to 8 hours, which are great if you're in an extended, like a wildfire situation or that sort of thing. You should have water, something to eat, because you're probably not going to get a lunch break. Rain gear. I recommend an extra pair of old shoes, some boots, gloves, hat, first aid kit, in case you need a Band-Aid, flashlight, sunscreen, extra notebooks, pens and pencils. And I do say pencils because in the winter, if you're out there and your pen's not working, somebody said gel pens work in all weather. I don't know, I've never tried that.
Or your pen runs out of ink.
Or your pen runs out of ink. There's all sorts of things. Have some extra stuff in your car. There was a reporter at the Gazette who always had hand warmers because he said, I can't text or tweet when my hands get too cold. So he'd have hand warmers to keep his hands warm so he could do his job. So come to work with gas in your tank if you're on empty, and I mean you're on the fumes, which we've all been there, and you're sent out and it's 20 miles away and you got to take 10 minutes to get gas. You know, that's not a good thing. So you should always have, you know, some gas in your tank to get at least for the immediate vicinity. Staff numbers, emergency source numbers should be in your phone, including fire rescue, cops, all the local agencies, San Juan National Forest people, whoever you can do. And then as you're going to a scene, be aware of your surroundings, what you're doing. You want to get to the scene but not become part of it. Don't get police taped into a scene. And a couple of examples of that, when the Planned Parenthood shooting happened in Colorado Springs last November, one of the first reporters on the scene drove into the active shooter scene, started to get out of the car. The cops were yelling, get out of here. Instead of getting back in his car and driving, he ran. His car was there for 2 or 3 days. I don't remember exactly. It was part of the scene. He could not get to, it was November, he could not get to his gloves. He could not get to all of his extra stuff that he had in the car because that was a requirement. Fortunately, there were a lot of other reporters who came to the scene to his rescue, so because they were out there for hours. And so he had that, but he didn't get his car back for a while. And that has happened other times. And your car can become, you know, if it got a bullet hole in it, you might not get it back for a really long time. So be aware plus your own safety. You know, I totally freaked out after I was out of town at the time, but totally freaked out was like, you could have been shot. You don't have to get that close. When you see cops around with guns, stay behind them. You know, don't drive up to them. You figure they're in the, so just be aware of that. Urgent, immediate, now, seconds matter. Social media is your competition, so get plugged into it and use it. Everybody should be following Twitter, have TweetDeck when they're in the office, follow Twitter on scenes. You can do that while you're out there. In your downtime, check what other people are getting. Use the old-fashioned as well, things like Scanner, yep, that's old-fashioned. News tips, emails, websites, and calls, as well as the social media. In Durango, not all the agencies use Twitter as their news release. In many other communities and around the state, they do. That is their official way of getting the information out. So that'll come here sooner or later. So you need to get in the practice of it now. Durango Fire actually does it a little bit. They're not real consistent, but they do it. When you hear something, jump on it. Confirm it, tweet it, prepare the story for online. If you hear about something and you're not sure anybody else is on it, and they should be, and it's not your job, mention it to someone. Because we all need to, somebody mentioned this morning, there was a no burn tweet from the fire department, so we put that up. So if you see those things, act on it, do something about it. Tell the breaking news editor or whoever is the editor in the room. If I'm in the bathroom, tell somebody else. You don't have to wait till you find me. And photo. Photo, you know, it's much more essential for photo to get to the scene quicker than a reporter in most cases, because they need to catch what's going on. One phone call isn't enough. If you hear something and you're trying to confirm if it's true, call any agency or authority involved in, you know, or the corner store next to what's happening. You can call, done that many, many times. A community, call somebody in Hesperus. Is it snowing there? Is the road shut down? Is there a crash in front of your store? That can be confirmation, because if someone can physically see it and describe it to you, then we know that there's something going on. It's not official and you have to say where you get it, but sometimes you'll get really good stories that way. And at least that lets you know if there's some truth to it, if it's something we should think about running out to. So don't stop with one phone call. Go to the scene. There's very few exceptions that we wouldn't want to be at the scene. Sometimes news happens far away, like the Coos thing, which we can't be at the scene, and you have to work it in a different way. But most of the time, you're going to get something at the scene that's the only way you'll get it, whether it's color, whether it's seeing who's there, or whatever. Tweet constantly. Constantly might be a bit of an overstatement, but that you're headed to the scene. Let your followers know we're heading out there. We're going to go tell you what this is. That'll get you followers. That you're there. We're at the scene. Can't get close yet. Waiting for police spokesperson to come out. Whatever is going on, tweet it out. That not only lets your followers know, it lets your editor know that you're there and that you're waiting and that you can't, you know. But you can say what it looks like, who's there, tweet photos, even if it's of cop cars or firefighters or, you know, police tape, whatever. Those should become your notes, and they also allow updating of an online story while you're out there. If it's a big enough event and there's more than one person there, coordinate with whoever else is at the scene and who's working it in the office, so that we don't have duplication, miss things, and chaos. We'll probably have chaos anyway if it's big enough, but it can limit that. Never leave the scene without talking to the breaking news editor and say, okay, I think I'm done here. I think I've got everything. Is there anything else? Check in so we know you're en route back or what the next step is. Revisit the scene often. When we, in Colorado Springs, had the Haggard story that he had visited with been at a gay bar and was buying meth in Denver, and all that was going down. He was holed up at his house. Everybody was trying to get a statement. I sent a reporter out to that scene. who got there and said, nothing's going on, I want to come back. And I said, no, you're there. You are there. And he was there for several hours, and Haggard did come out, and that's when the story actually really broke. There was one other TV station and the Gazette, and that was it. Nobody else stayed for the 4 or 5 hours that it took. That's why you need to be prepared to be somewhere, so you can get to your car and get your water and your snack and your stuff while you're waiting for something. Those don't happen a lot, but they do happen. Fires, obviously, wildfires, you can be out there for a really long time, so there are things. At the scene, observe everything, use your senses, note it, tell it. Sketch things that, take your notepad and sketch things out, because you don't know what might be important later. And at many of these scenes, it's become a, was this car there, was that car there, where were people? It can become an issue with response time for police, fire, all sorts of things. So it doesn't have to be something we're going to publish in a map. Just write it in your notebook. You know, here's some things that were there. The barn was to the left. The house was to the right. The cattle were grazing still in the field to the, you know, farther in the distance. Things that may or may not become important, but if you sketch it a little bit on your notepad, it can help in the future, because a lot of times those do become important. Get cell phone numbers of everyone you speak with for follow-up. Again, you don't know who might be displaced, who you might need to get a hold of, who you might need to check something with. Check the addresses. If you're standing out in front of a place and you can read the address, look it up on the website, see who owns it. It can lead you somewhere if you hear somebody talking about that. If for some reason you can't, because you don't have reception, internet, text back to the office, and somebody here can look that up for you and let you know who the owner is. Knock on doors and note the addresses, where you knocked, where somebody was home, where somebody slammed the door in your face, where somebody said, I don't know anything, come back later, whatever. Make notes, because we don't want to knock on the same doors twice if it was a dead end. And ask people, do you know somebody who might know these people? Do you know somebody who might know what happened last night? Whatever the case is. Developing the story. Focus should, once we know we have something big, be on people to the extent possible. Victims, suspects, witnesses, bystanders, evacuees in the case of fires, or gas leaks or other big things like that. You need everyone. Write down the names you overhear on the scanner at the scene. They might lead somewhere. We had some early indications of names on various stories where you can start to do background, and it helps you get to people quicker. Track them down, where they live, work, neighbors. Check comments on stories, Facebook, and this is something I just learned last week, so we're always learning, so we should always be sharing. When Jonathan said, oh, I checked the shares, and the shares lead to more friends, and that led us somewhere in that Fort Lewis College killing. That helps us begin to link people. Call, email, message anyone that seems associated. And of course, here, voter registration lists do work, because people still put their phone numbers on them here in Durango. It doesn't work everywhere, but whatever works locally, use it as much as you can. Developing the story quickly is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you are trying to get, and there's a certain sensitivity about how soon do you call the family, how often do you call the family of victims, and you want to be sensitive to that, but you also don't want to be fourth in line, because if they've already talked to TV, Denver Post, somebody else, they're going to say, you know, I already talked to 3 reporters, I'm done. I don't want to talk anymore. And that is often the case. So, you know, talk to an editor about timing if you're worried about being too quick. But the more you can develop about who we want to call and who we want to get to early, the better off we're going to be in the long run. Teamwork is essential on any big story, whether it's one reporter and one photographer or the entire staff. To be efficient, you got to share where you've been, who you've called, again, to avoid duplication. Someone's always in charge. Usually it'll be the breaking news editor, or it'll be handed off. and they have to be kept in the loop so that, and it can be Twitter, but check in, and there are also things you're going to want to share that you don't want to put out publicly, so you can text that information. Follow directions. If you're assigned to an aspect, stick to it. If you run across something else, of course, check in and say, hey, is anybody following this? Should I jump on this as well? Because it will shift and it will change. Text or call in info that isn't for publication but needs to be shared, like things you overhear that aren't, you know, that aren't confirmed but that might be worth sharing. Words matter, being accurate, having impact and precision. You know, what officials are saying, and sometimes more importantly, what they're not saying. Be really careful of offhand remarks and embellishments. That, you know, people will say things at the scene that may or may not be true. In the excitement of the moment, especially witnesses and untrained, but even officials will say things that, so if you're going, how could that have happened? Ask, how could that have happened? How could that be? Back in 1991, I've never forgotten this, we had a story about the airliner crash in Colorado Springs where one of the reporters put in the story, and I was a reporter at the time, I wasn't an editor, that one of the witnesses to this plane that was nosediving at probably 500 miles an hour into the ground, that they saw someone with their hands against the airliner window screaming. Now, what do you think the likelihood of that is? Have you ever tried to wave to somebody leaving on an airplane and you can't even see through the window? It was what they imagined. It was a young person. You know, it was their reality that they imagined this happening. They didn't see it. And I think that's a disservice to victims, survivors, and other people to add that kind of embellishment. So be careful. Is it possible? Don't go off the record. You're not out there to get information you can't use. You're out there to get information for the public. And, you know, of course, there are always times when people want to tell you something, to explain something, and so you can use some discretion. But generally, don't make it a habit of going off the record. And be persistent. What do you mean by that? How so? Because you want clarity of how things went down. That crash with the motorcycle the other day was a perfect example of, you know, Jerry got out there and it's like, okay, if this truck hit this and they were all in different orders, how could that be? It was very confusing. And you have to keep asking questions to get how that played out. It's not over. Just because you're, you know, relieved, you're off shift, whatever, handoff is critical. Debrief with an editor and the reporter is going to pick up. Doesn't matter whether it's a road closure that you wrote about and we're waiting to get the road open, or it is, you know, a major homicide, the FLC, the Coos story, whatever, handoff has to happen. Share numbers, sources, what's been done. One of the things we hadn't really talked about here before is starting an incident folder. We did that with Coos. I had Ann gather everything up that we had, include like official releases, statements. We can do that in an electronic shared document, which is really good if you have a big incident like a fire where you have a lot of evacuees and you've got a lot of names and numbers. That's the best way to do it rather than putting them in a folder somewhere. But some things, it's really important to kind of hold on to those hard copies and they can get lost in email. So she started, there will probably be an anniversary story for the Coos thing. And so we have some of the people we talked to and the information that we had. When we had the Waldo Canyon fire in Colorado Springs, I saved a copy of every single, and they were coming from multiple agencies, the files were this thick, every press release. That became critical for the 1-year anniversary when we were trying to check the timeline. I had somebody put them all in order, so they were by day, so we were like, oh, we have a whole what happened on the 3rd day. Were we confused? And we could go back and check those releases. It becomes really critical in a big instant where you're getting a lot of information from a lot of sources. Before you leave for the day, discuss potential follows. What should we, hey, somebody should check on this the next day. Here's something I couldn't get confirmation of. And if it's an ongoing story, obviously that becomes bigger deal. People who work at night should leave overnight notes for the morning crew, where we left off, what we did and didn't get. Don't assume that because you said something at 6 that I'm not going to assume it still didn't happen at 8, you know, because it could have happened. So leave those overnight notes. And sometimes it's never over. Gold King, that'll be going on for probably as long as all of us work here. And much longer with the Superfund stuff. So they don't. That's why documenting what you have and keeping some of this information becomes really, really critical for the future. Note anniversaries on your calendar, not just the actual anniversaries, the 1 year, 2 year, but some other dates that might be key. In wildfires, where houses are destroyed, there are deadlines for people filing insurance claims. There are things like that you'll probably pick up. So put those on a calendar. Again, that should probably be on whatever shared doc we have for a particular incident. Watch for lawsuits. It happens all the time. People file lawsuits. It's another way into a story. Track recovery setbacks, related tragedies. The Columbine shooting, there were a number of people there that had multiple tragedies afterwards. People commit suicide later who have been, you know, victimized or related to crimes, things like that. So there's all sorts of stories that in big tragedies can come out of that. The Aurora Theater shooting, I'm sure Orlando, those stories, you'll see them coming out for forever. Watch for action. Families often want to set up something, a nonprofit, take action, a fund, whatever it is. Legislation, that happened with Gold King. We had a lot of various, you know, Good Samaritan things we've been tracking. They're slow going, so you might be tracking them for a long time. Changes in local regulations that often can happen out of a local news story. And keep those files. Keep your notes in some cases, because you never know. And I'm going to tell you a little story that I did out of that. I was in that 1991 plane crash in Colorado Springs. I was not there the day of the crash, but I was the lead reporter for all the follow-up. It was a 737, and it nosedived into the ground. It was one of 2 crashes in U.S. history that they never found a cause for. I ended up going to hearings in Washington, D.C., and they held this went on for a couple of years, and they could not find a cause. And I had, of course, by this point gotten to know, well, I knew way more about airplane rudders and things like that than I ever wanted to know, but I also got to know the NTSB investigators quite well. And at the end of this, when they said they finally did the paperwork, they're done, no cause, I interviewed the primary investigator, and he gave me one of those killer quotes about, well, your worst nightmare when you don't have a cause is that you'll wake up some morning and this will happen again. And it did. And I had that quote. In 1994, U.S. Air 737 nosedived in Pittsburgh and killed 132 people, far more than died in the Colorado Springs crash. And I pulled out that quote, and I got a hold of that investigator, and he didn't want to talk about the new crash because he wasn't part of it, but we used that quote, and I wrote the local story because it tied right back to what had happened in Colorado Springs. So when you have an open-ended story like that, you need to keep the stuff because you don't know when it's going to come back to haunt you. And that can happen, you know, we can have another blowout, another mine blowout. It can happen on many, many stories. Some of the information you have and keep can make a really good story down the road. So, like I said, sometimes it's never over. Breaking news is where we start, and we often just keep going with it forever. You guys have questions, comments?
Where did the incident folders live for us?
Well, since we haven't done that before, that I know of, they don't anywhere just yet. Anne kept the one at her desk. I told her just to keep that and that we'd talk about it as a staff. I have a little stand-up file that I don't actually use, and it may just be like at the end where that bulletin board is, that we can put them in there. And then if we decide, like if we do have a wildfire or something like that, we'll create a shared doc, one of the Google Docs like we use for the budget, and that's a really good place to keep names. And you know, and it's one of those things you can throw some stuff in and go back and update, and you can have in there some graphs that, you know, the fire burned X number, when you're all done, that you can pull out and use over and over. The fire burned X number of acres, destroyed X number of homes, that sort of thing. Same with floods or any big story. So if it's something that goes beyond, you know, a fairly big thing, I think we'll create a Google Doc and just share it with everybody on the staff, and then everybody contributes the phone numbers and stuff to it. So I'll get that set up, and we'll put Coos. I don't know that we started one with the Fort Lewis College homicide. We probably should, because we have a lot of various information that we could throw in that for when the trials come and whatever aftermath there is. Anything else?
Is the breaking editor, would that be one of you guys during during regular hours?
Well,
Like the breaking news editor?
it's usually me when
Okay.
I'm here, and I have that little flag, and
Okay.
like yesterday when I went out of the office for an hour, I took it over and put it by Patrick's desk.
Okay.
So then you can kind of look up and go, okay, this is who I need to talk to. And sometimes, you know, more than one editor is going to be involved, because with online, like we had with the Coos thing, we had somebody putting, and we tried to, Amy was the point person at, when was that, Friday? When the body was coming back. And we let everybody involved know with that, because I was doing other things. And then like on Saturday, I was in the office pulling photos, and Mark was here. So who's ever involved can find out who's doing what in relation to the story. But if you're unsure, just talk to somebody and say, I don't know who to talk to, but you know, here's what's going on, because we'll share it.
Do you ask Shane to start an incident folder for the is it Red Horse case that's being revisited? Because if, like, I know that this is being reopened, and
Right.
if Shane wasn't here and hadn't covered it the first time, we'd have his clips, but we wouldn't have his
Anything
institutional
else.
knowledge.
Yep.
That's happened a lot with, like, in the last year, we lost a lot of people with institutional knowledge, and just, they're not here to ask, and we don't have their notes, and,
Yep.
I mean, we can start from scratch every single time, but.
That's why with a lot of those cases, and we will start one with Fort Lewis College, I'll ask him, because I know he's not, he should be here for the duration. But there's always you could be hit by a truck on the way to work, you know, and so sharing that stuff as we go along is really important for those kinds of cases. And I'm sure at the time, nobody thought Nakai would have 3 trials, but, you know, it happens sometimes.